Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to Stop Motion Spookies. And for today's stop motion scary flick, we're gonna once again see Tim Burton take the helm as we take a look at Corpse Bride. And much like with The Nightmare Before Christmas, my history with this film is kind of complicated to say the least. As I mentioned in the last video, my history with scary films was complicated to say the least. I was very much averse to it, and I didn't really want to be associated with it while I was a kid. And when I first saw ads of the film, I just was weirded out by it, especially when the plot for the film just kind of looked strange to say the least. Like, it seemed to be about a guy who was engaged to a corpse even though he was engaged to another woman. It just kind of felt weird to me, and it just kind of put me off from wanting to see the movie. Even as I got older and my opinions towards scary stuff did soften a bit, I still didn't really want to go out and see this movie. Even when I eventually got a copy when my parents gave me theirs, I just kept the DVD on my shelf for years and just never gave it a second thought. That is until last year, while I was on Discord call with friends and we had a movie night, with Corpse Bride being the film chosen. At that point in time, I had already decided that I was going to be doing these particular vlogs, and I figured, well, I might as well sit down and watch this movie before I actually go and vlog about it next year. And so I sat down and I watched it with friends over Discord, and to say my opinions of it were complicated is, well, exactly that. They were just complicated. I didn't hate the film. There were things about it that I enjoyed, but there were also plenty of things there that made me scratch my head and go, what? Too. So, like I said, I didn't hate it, but I don't think I loved it either. It was just a mixed bag, if that makes any sense. And as such, when it came time for me to actually watch it for today's vlog, I was curious how my opinion towards the movie would change. Would my opinion have grown about it, or did my opinion lessen about it? It was something that I was curious about, and while I can say on a second viewing that I did notice a few more things about the movie that made me appreciate it more, my opinions of it were still sort of mixed. With that said, is it a movie that I would recommend to people, or is it something that I would just throw to the curbside? Well, let's talk about it and find out. Ladies and gentlemen, let's actually get into a proper discussion about Tim Burton's Corpse Bride. And before I actually get to my thoughts on the film proper, let's get to our long-ass plot summary. And the film opens in basically a 19th century Victorian-era town, as we see that the town in its regular social drudgery is getting ready for a wedding. Specifically, the wedding of the youngest children of the Everglots and the Van Dorts. Both of these families are kind of, I'm not going to say pillars in the community, but they are somewhat high up on the totem pole. For the Van Dorts, while they aren't really like big names in the village and aren't really respected amongst higher social circles, they do have money to their name, as they made their money in the fish market, and basically part of the reason why they're for marrying off their son is because if they marry into the Everglots, who are a politically influential family, then they'll be able to rub shoulder to shoulder with politicians and celebrities and all that stuff, and they just want to bask in that, As for the Everglots, well, while they do look down on the Van Dorts, they do want to marry off the youngest daughter for one particular reason. They're flat broke. Yeah, the Everglots wound up, unfortunately, spending all of their money, and so they don't even have a penny to their names. As such, they believe that if they can marry Victoria off to the Van Dorts, then they can wind up sharing in their wealth, and thus the Everglots won't have to go out on the streets. As such, while both families have different reactions to the other, both want this wedding to go forth without a hitch. Unfortunately, the only people that are a little hesitant about the wedding are their kids themselves, Victor Van Dort and Victoria Everglot, as both of them are a little unsure about going through with the wedding. For Victor, it's mostly because the Everglots, like I said, are such an influential family, and he begins thinking that he's not good enough to actually marry into the family and actually be considered an equal with Victoria Everglot. And in the case of Victoria, well, she has her own opinions on marriage, so to speak. As we learn in a scene that happens a little later in the movie, she basically admits that she's dreamed about her wedding ever since she was a child, and she always hoped it would be to someone that she deeply loved and cared about. And basically just being forced to marry this complete stranger just because her family doesn't want to end up destitute it's not how she pictured her wedding going, so to speak. But she's kind of being forced into it, Victor too. And as such, while both families do end up meeting at the Everglot Manor, Victor and Victoria finally get a chance to actually talk when both of their parents go into another room and Victor is left alone in the Everglot foyer with their piano, where he begins like just playing a soothing melody on it to try and calm his nerves, which is what gets Victoria's attention as she was upstairs and she heard the piano playing, and so she came down and saw Victor playing on the piano. And she's admittedly a little enraptured by it. She thinks he plays nicely, and Victor is also just a little nervous to see Victoria, but the two of them do end up clicking as both of them start talking about their respective situations. Or at least Victoria is, and Victor just kind of stumbles over his words because he doesn't really know how to talk to Victoria. However, before they can really start bonding even further, Victoria's mother bursts into the room saying that it's improper for them to be alone together right now, which... Again, they're gonna get married. Let them be alone together. But then again, 19th century values, what do I know? And as such, she tells them that they need to get ready for the wedding rehearsal. And so the film cuts ahead to 3 hours later as we see everyone gathered in either the Everglot Manor's, a sitting room, I suppose, or maybe it's a church. I don't know. It's one of the two. As we see Victor trying to practice his vows and failing miserably, much to the presiding priest's annoyance. As such, through all this, the rehearsal gets an unexpected guest in the form of a man by the name of Lord... Hold on, let me get his name out. Sorry. The man... Yeah, hold on one second. Sorry, I had to look to my notes. But yeah, the wedding rehearsal is essentially crashed by a man named Lord Barkis Bittern. And with a name like that, you could probably tell what he's going to be in this movie. That's right, the comedic sidekick! Yeah, no, the guy is just clearly some kind of staunch, arrogant, I'm better than you pretty boy, and despite not being invited to the wedding, he shows up anyway like he was, and everyone just kind of goes along with it because, hey, maybe he's related to someone, I don't know. But either way, he's there for the rehearsal, and unfortunately the rehearsal does not go well, as Victor continues flubbing his vows, and when he tries pulling out the ring as part of the rehearsal, he ends up dropping it, and in his attempt to try and go get it, he accidentally sets his future mother-in-law's dress on fire because he was holding a candle while he went to go grab the ring. Thankfully, she does not get burned alive, as Barkis manages to douse the fire with a goblet of wine, but at this point it's clear the rehearsal has just kind of gone down the crapper, and as such, everyone just kind of breaks up to do their own thing, though the priest kind of threateningly tells Victor that he better memorize his vows, which causes Victor to kind of scared out of his wits, run out of the building and out into the woods, where he just starts beating himself up over the fact that he can't get his vows right. However, as he does this, he continues practicing them and walks through the woods as he tries to just get everything right. And ultimately, he does manage to get a surge of inspiration, as earlier in the movie, Victoria had given him a flower that her family kept in a vase on the piano, and holding said flower does kind of give Victor the clarity that he needs to get the vows right. As he walks through the woods, says them perfectly, and even fantasizes about being the son-in-law of the Everglots, he ends up finally pulling out the ring. As when he talks about giving the ring, as he puts some ring on someone and says that makes them his, he ends up putting it on what he thinks is like a twig to try and get everything down. Unfortunately, though, it turns out that what he put the ring on was not just a random branch sticking out of the ground. No, rather, it was a hand. A hand that ends up grabbing Victor and tries to pull him under the ground. Of course, Victor freaks the hell out and tries fighting back, managing to pull away from the ground, but he ends up pulling the hand out with him as we see that it is the hand of a skeleton. And as Victor freaks out and knocks this thing off, something else starts rising from the ground too, as from the earth arrives the titular corpse bride, just draped out in a wedding veil and looking to Victor with a creepy smile saying, I do. Of course, Victor, seeing what is essentially a zombie rise from the ground, just kind of turns the other way and runs like hell, with the corpse bride just following after, even reattaching her hand. And unfortunately for Victor, due to various hijinks where he runs into a tree, ends up slipping and sliding on a frozen lake, and even gets caught in some brambles, the corpse bride manages to catch up to him on a bridge outside of the church, and with a kiss, since, kiss the bride, Victor ends up passing out in her arms. And when he awakens, he finds that he is no longer in the land of the living. He's not dead, at all. I'm just going to say this right now. He is not dead, but he is not in the, but he is basically in the land of the dead, surrounded by the dead, as Victor finds that the dead are just surrounding him and poking and prodding at him because, oh my god, he's a living person, they want to know everything about him. And as such, Victor freaks the hell out and wants to know where the hell he is, as it turns out that the wedding reception for his and his, well, I guess bride's wedding is being held at a random bar in the land of the dead. Of course, Victor is still not exactly happy with seeing all of this, and so he just is jumpy and squirmy and just kind of going, what the hell is going on? And even at one point tries pulling a sword out of a guy, specifically what looks like a French soldier, as he begins waving the sword, and the guy around, and then the guy, since he couldn't pull it out, just around and demands to get answers and wants to know what the hell is going on. And he eventually does get those answers in the form of a song called Remains of the Day. At least that's what I think it's called. Let me double check. And yeah, it's called Remains of the Day. And basically the song is just kind of exemplifying how, yeah, we all may want to try and fight it off, but when it comes down to it, we all end up as the remains of the day, since death comes for us all. But as for the corpse bride, her story is a bit more tragic. Once upon a time, she used to be a lovely young maiden who wound up falling in love with a handsome stranger that came to town. She, of course, wanted to be married to the man, but her father forbade the marriage and wanted them to stop seeing each other. However, thinking that love won out, she and her betrothed wound up deciding that they were just going to run away and elope. However, before they did this, the bride was convinced to, gather her family's most precious items, jewels, gold, all that stuff. And after she donned her mother's wedding dress, she ran out and was to meet her future husband under a tree by a graveyard, which is actually where Victor found her. Unfortunately, while she did end up meeting the man that she thought was going to be her husband, rather than taking her away so they could live a life of happiness together, he wound up killing her. And when she wound up awakening in the land of the dead, she found that she had lost all of the valuable heirlooms that she had brought with her. Obviously heartbroken, the bride at this point had made a vow that while this husband may have been a bust, she was going to wait under that tree for as long as she had to until her true love would come and they would be wed. Which is where Victor came in as well by doing his fake proposal right there under the tree. She basically said, okay, that counts, and now says that he is her husband. And as such, she whisked him away to the land of the dead, where she hopes they'll be able to live happily ever after. Victor, of course, is not happy with this news and still kind of freaks the hell out and even just runs out of the bar with his bride following after because she's a little worried about him. As such, after Victor runs through the streets of the land of the dead and eventually tries crawling up a mountain to get away from his bride, she ends up catching up to him. Mostly because the mountain he was climbing had a set of stairs that she just walked up and met him at the top on. And as such, after she helps him get up, the two of them finally have an opportunity to talk. As Victor says that while his bride seems like a nice young lady, well, he doesn't think this is going to work out. Partially because they know nothing about her. He knows nothing about her. As such, the bride finally tells Victor her name, Emily. And while she can understand that he's a little nervous, to try and ease his nerves, so to speak, Emily gives Victor a wedding present, which in this case, it's his dead dog. Earlier in the movie when we saw Victor at his home, we saw that as a kid he did have a dog, and as you do with pets, the dog eventually passed away, and so Emily gives him the dog's remains, which in this case are a skeleton, but in the land of the dead, the skeleton is very lively, and his dog, I think named Scraps, hold on, let me double check, I think the dog's name is Scraps. There we go, yep, the dog is named Scraps. Scraps does remember Victor, and it's like just seeing an old friend again, as Victor is happy to see his best friend again, and Scraps is jumping all over him, being lovey-dovey. It's honestly really sweet, and I like it. And it's a nice way to help ingratiate Emily to the audience, because we see that she isn't just heartless. She genuinely is trying to make Victor happy. As such, however, while Victor is petting his dog, he begins remembering how his mother never approved of Scraps jumping up on people, and begins lamenting that she never seemed to approve of anything. As such, she does mention that maybe it was a good thing that Emily never met his mother, before Victor suddenly gets an idea. As such, Emily wants to know what he's thinking about, and in a bid to try and get out of the land of the dead, Victor ends up telling Emily that maybe they could go up and see his parents. At first, Emily thinks that maybe they're somewhere in the land of the dead and that's what he means, but no, he confirms that his parents are still alive. As such, Emily begins wondering how can they go back to the land of the living, even though that she was just up there in order to grab Victor. Well, Scraps, through the power of barking, does tell Emily that there might be someone that can help them. In this case, an elder skeleton by the name of Elder Goodnick, who might be able to provide the information they need to get to the land of the living, as he lives in a tower that's just full of old dusty tomes and what have you. As such, the pair go to see Elder Goodnick, and, well, he does have a spell, and he does have a spell, and he basically, what he's going to do is that he's going to use the spell on the pair, and it'll allow them to just walk around in the land of the living like no big deal, with them both being able to return to the land of the dead by simply saying the word hopscotch. As such, he ends up casting the spell on them by breaking a crow's egg on them, which covers them in dust, and so Victor and Emily return to the land of the living, with Emily actually being happy to return there since like Lyco said in the song, she spent most of her time just stuck under a tree waiting for her husband-to-be. So being able to finally move around and just do her own thing, be happy, it's nice for her, and I kind of like that. However, as she's just prancing and dancing around, Victor starts feeling a mite guilty because, while Emily is clearly a nice lady, well, what he's doing right now is a bit shady, as he's essentially planning to ditch her. As such, after calming Emily down, he tells her to just kind of sit in place, and that he's going to go and talk to his parents, prepare them for the news and all that stuff. And he tells her to just stay and not follow him, which Emily does because she trusts him. But yeah, it's clear that Victor has ulterior motives as he runs into town and straight for the Everglot Manor. However, upon arriving, he doesn't go inside because he hears the Everglots talking about how they want to wring his neck, which is why we should probably get back to talking about the land of the living while Victor was gone. For you see, when Victor was whisked away to the land of the dead by Emily, the town crier wound up seeing it happen and, not knowing that the woman that he was with was a corpse, basically announced to the town, oh yeah, Victor ran off with another woman, which the Everglots are not exactly happy to hear, and even Mr. Everglot wants to get his rifle and hunt for the kid. However, the Van Dots actually try and calm the Everglots down, as they say that they want to see if they can go look for his son and bring him back before the wedding, which the Everglots concede to, but only if they can get their son back by dawn. And unfortunately, by the time Victor returns back to their manor, their tempers have not cooled, and they just want to wring the guy's neck. As such, deciding to not go through the front door and run into his fiance's murderous parents, he decides to decides to climb the manor from another place and sneak in through a window that leads to Victoria's room. And when Victoria sees Victor, she's of course happy to see him okay and actually back, and Victoria explains that he didn't actually run away, and he genuinely does want to marry Victoria, as while he was nervous before, the instant he saw her, he knew that he loved her and wanted to spend the rest of his life together. Or spend the rest of his life with her. I'll get to my thoughts on that later. But either way, as Victor is confessing this to Victoria, they get a bit of an unexpected visitor in the form of Emily. For you see, one character in this movie that I've neglected to mention is a maggot that crawls around in Emily's head. And the maggot, of course, can talk. And so while Emily was just sitting around waiting for Victor to come back, the maggot basically kind of whispered in her ear, so to speak, both figuratively and literally, that maybe she thinks that something's up with Victor. And while Emily tries to just talk the maggot down and says, oh no, he's coming back, I trust him, the maggot pretty much said, well, why don't you go talk to him and see what's taken him so long to return? And so she was able to follow him thanks to his footprints, and Emily ends up catching Victor talking to Victoria. And obviously, when Emily sees Victor with this other woman, she's a little unhappy. As such, Victor tries to explain to both women that it's not what it seems. Mostly in the case of Emily, he's trying to tell her that this is the woman I want to marry. Well, Emily is not exactly taking that lying down, and so before Victor can fully explain the situation to Victoria, Emily ends up saying hopscotch and goes back to the land of the dead, dragging Victor with her. As such, Victoria is obviously a little horrified to see her husband-to-be taken away by what is essentially a corpse, and so she tries to warn her parents that Victor didn't run away, that he was kidnapped by a corpse. And obviously no one believes her, because after all, saying that someone was taken away by a literal walking body sounds fucking insane. As such, Victoria's parents end up locking her in her room, and while she does sneak away and run to the church to try and get the help of the priest, he equally thinks that she's crazy, brings her back to her manor, and they not only lock her back in her room, but end up barring the window so she can't get out that way. So, yeah, no one believes Victoria's story. Meanwhile, back in the land of the dead, Emily is not exactly happy that Victor tricked her and that he was seeing another woman. Of course, her first response is to tell Victor, well, stop seeing that other woman. I'm your wife. You don't see her. But Victor tries to tell her, look, I'm sorry, but she's not the other woman. You are. I love her and I want to get married to her. And while you seem like a nice lady and under different circumstances we could work out, well, we're just two different people, especially since you're dead and I'm alive. This kind of ends up breaking Emily's heart a little, as she ends up just kind of walking away and becomes so very forlorn as she walks the streets of the dead. And while this does lead to another song, which again, sorry, I keep pulling out my phone. The song is called Tears to Shed, which involves the maggot and a Black Widow spider trying to comfort her. Well, Emily just still feels very heartbroken over the fact that the husband that she's wanted for so long wants nothing to do with her, and as such, she really has no idea what to do. Meanwhile, back in the land of the living, the Everglotts are still not believing their daughter's story, begin wondering how the hell they're going to get out of the situation. After all, the whole reason they wanted to go through with this wedding was so that they could get the vast fortunes of the Van Dort family. Did I call them Van Dot before? I apologize if I did. But basically, if Victor isn't around, they're beginning to wonder how they can have a wedding, and likewise where they can get their extra funds. Which is where Lord Barkis comes in, as he overhears them talking about trying to find a new husband for their daughter, conveniently not hearing the part where they said that they're flat broke, and basically he just immediately starts talking about how that Victoria would make a very nice blushing bride for any man to have. That Victor is missing out and all that stuff. And that basically if he had a wife like Victoria, that he would basically wine and dine her and share his vast wealth with her and blah blah blah. My point is this: the Everglotts hear the fact that hear him say that he's actually rich and decide that he'll make a good substitute, and so they tell Victoria that she'll be marrying Lord Barkis at the wedding the next day, much to her chagrin. However, Lord Barkis does have ulterior motives, as you can probably tell, as the only reason he wants to marry Victoria is because he thinks the Everglotts are filthy rich, and once he gets that money, he plans to just kill Victoria. So yeah, the guy is kind of a douche. Meanwhile, back with the Van Dorts, who are still looking for their son, the town crier announces to them while they're crossing a bridge in their carriage that Victoria is going to be marrying an outsider, which causes them to freak out a little. But as they're crossing the bridge, their driver, whose name I do not remember, I think it's Matthew or I don't know what it is. It starts with Matt. Ends up having a heart attack. And he ends up dropping dead right there, which the Van Dorts don't even realize. He literally just falls out of the carriage, and the carriage just runs him over. You think that they would have stopped to check on him at that point. But yeah, the guy is dead. Meanwhile, back in the land of the dead, Victor and Emily end up kind of sharing a moment with each other as they manage to break the tension somewhat, as it turns out that Emily, like Victor, is musically inclined, as they both play a duet on the piano, and it does lead to them clicking somewhat and actually finding something that they have in common. However, before they can continue this moment further, the town goes into an uproar as a new arrival shows up. As such, everyone gathers in the bar where Victor and Emily were, and when Victor goes to see who this new arrival is, he finds that it's his parents' driver, which he says he's sorry for the guy for what happened to him, but his driver just kind of brushes it off like, whatever, he feels fine now. And so he just kind of goes up to the bar to get a drink while Victor wants to know what the heck's going on in the land of the living. And the driver does confirm that people are wondering where the heck Victor ran off to, but he also does confirm to Victor that Victoria is going to be marrying Lord Barkis, which does make Victor feel very forlorn, and he starts believing that he's too late to win Victoria's hand, which does kind of put him in a slight slump as he just kind of wanders out of the bar, which does worry Emily. However, before she can go after him, that's when Elder, again, sorry, I kind of forgot his name. His name is... again, I'm so sorry about this. Elder Elder Goodnick, sorry, again, it's hard to remember. That's Elder Goodnick ends up meeting up with Emily, and he reveals that, well, the wedding vows that she exchanged with Victor, they're not really that binding. It turns out that because part of the wedding vows is till death do us part, well, they don't really count because, well, Emily's already dead. Death has departed her. She and Victor cannot legally be wed since he is still alive and she is of the dead. So they are not really married at all, which Emily is not okay with. As such, they say that however, they do tell Emily that there is a way to make their marriage, well, actually binding. And that is to kill Victor. Sort of. Basically, what has to happen is that Victor has to make his vows in the land of the living, and then give up his own life by drinking from the wine of ages, aka poison. And once he basically downs that, it'll stop his heart, and he will officially be dead for realsies. And once that happens, then he and Emily can actually be married. However, Emily doesn't want to she doesn't want to win Victor that way. While she is a bit possessive of having him, since, like I said, being married was kind of a big thing for her and was essentially her unfinished business. Well, she doesn't want to have to trick Victor like that. She doesn't want to have to say, hey, you know, it'd be funny if we went to the land of the living, you said your vows, then you drank this wine. She does not want to trick him like that, and does not want to ever ask him to just give up his own life. But at the same time, she doesn't want to give him up either, since this is what she's wanted for so long. However, she doesn't have to worry about him leaving for much longer, because it turns out Victor overheard the whole exchange, and I guess deciding that, well, his other bride is getting married and he can't have her, that he'll marry Emily. And so basically he decides that they're going to do this right. And so he and Emily end up calling basically a town meeting as they gather everyone in a square and say that they're going to have a wedding, that they're going to go up topside, they're going to actually say their vows proper, and when they return to the land of the dead, it'll be with Victor and Emily officially being a couple. As such, the town roars in is just uproaring in celebration as they all get ready to go to the land of the living and get ready for a wedding. Meanwhile, in said land of the living, well, Victoria's marriage to Lord Barkis ends up going off without a hitch, when, yeah, Victoria's clearly not happy throughout the whole thing, as she's just emotionally detached and her head's just clearly in another place. And so she does end up getting married to Lord Barkis, and while the reception does end up going back to her house, which is not a very lively reception, basically Lord Barkis just talks about how thrilling it is to be married to Victoria, that she's lucky to have a husband who's smart, cunning, gracious, and all that crap. However, as he says this, that's when the dead start finally rising up, as they start appearing all over town, especially in hold on a second. Sorry, was banking on their last names. As the dead start appearing in the Everglot Manor, much to the wedding guests' shock, as they all just start screaming and running away from the dead. Although, the dead aren't being particularly threatening, as throughout town, people start seeing more of the dead start rising up, and all of them are reacting in fear and start just waving whatever they can at them. But eventually they start calming down as, well, they learn that the dead genuinely mean them no harm, as one kid goes up to one dead person and recognizes him as his grandpa, with the dead grandfather picking up his grandson and pulling him in for a hug. It's genuinely sweet. And hell, even another example, there was an old lady that was just whacking the head of this skeleton man who wanted to talk to her, but it turns out the skeleton man, it's her late husband, and upon her realizing that, she's just amazed to see him again, and he just pulls her into his arms and just kind of dips her, and it's just really sweet. As such, when the living realize the dead genuinely mean them no harm, they just kind of go along with it, as the wedding party for Victor and Emily's wedding just kind of makes their way to the church, which leads to a genuinely funny scene where the priest tries to scare the dead away, since these demons of hell cannot enter hollow ground, which only results in the dead just walking in and telling the priest, hey, quiet down, we're in a church. It's actually kind of funny. Meanwhile, though, as everything calms down back at the Everglot Manor, Lord Barkis justifiably thinks that maybe he and his new bride should just get the hell out of here. Just grab his dowry and just hit the road. which when Victoria hears the word dowry, she's a little confused. And so she tells Lord Barkis that she has no dowry. She lets him, as her family is flat broke, and that's the whole reason they even pushed this wedding in the first place, which when Lord Barkis realizes that he's not getting any money, he's a little upset, which results in Victoria essentially ditching him, telling him to piss off, and then going outside to see what the commotion is. And sure enough, that's when she sees the wedding reception just making its way to the church, with the living and dead joining each other in hands. As such, Victoria goes to said church, and sure enough, we see that Elder Goodnick, I think that's his name. Hold on again. I'm sorry. Yes, it was Elder Goodnick. Again, I'm sorry. I keep blanking on his name, so I wanted to confirm. We see that Elder Goodnick is officiating the wedding, as he's got the wine of ages on standby, and Emily comes in and gets herself ready here as the bride. As such, the two, Victor and Emily, begin exchanging vows, and Victor manages to get them right. But as the wedding is going on, Emily can't help but see Victoria in the background in her own wedding dress, and Emily starts realizing something. She's been kind of a dick this whole time, as she's realizing that basically what she's really doing right now, she's stealing another lady's husband. And as this realization starts to hit her, just as Victor is about to drink of the wine of ages, she stops him. And Victor's a little confused by this, and Emily admits that, yeah, she's dreamed her whole afterlife of being a bride, but now in order to achieve those dreams, she has to steal them from someone else, and she can't really live with that fact. And as such, she kind of gestures for Victoria to come over, when Victoria does, she takes Victoria's hands and puts it in Victor's, believing that they belong together. And while Emily does admit she still loves Victor, she doesn't want to win him at the expense of someone else that clearly loves him too. As such, she decides to willingly step aside so Victor and Victoria can be happily wed. Unfortunately, though, that we still had another wedding earlier, as Victoria's current husband, Lord Barkis, comes in and begins gloating about how, yeah, they can have a happily ever after, but he's her husband now, so she can't just walk away. Which results in him pulling a sword on everyone and pulling Victoria in, as he thinks that if he can't get a dowry, he's at least not going to walk away empty-handed. And guess what? It turns out Lord Barkis was the one that killed Emily. Yeah, he was the douchey husband-to-be that stole her family's most valuable stuff. And so when Emily sees him, she's not exactly happy that he's there. As such, Victor and Barkis end up getting into a fight, as Victor wants to defend Victoria. And what I love is that they end up getting into a sword fight with one of the undead cooks throwing Victor a fork to fight him off, which I find hilarious. And Victor does well enough, as he uses the fork somewhat effectively, but eventually said utensil gets knocked out of his hand, allowing Lord Barkis to go in for the kill, so to speak, before he can stab Victor through the chest. Emily steps in between the two, and the sword goes through her, and since she's already dead, it does jack shit to her, and she just pulls it out of her abdomen and points it at Lord Barkis, telling him to just get out. Which Lord Barkis concedes to, but to try and get another nail in the coffin, he decides that he's gonna propose a toast to Emily. Always the bridesmaid, never the bride. And so he ends up picking up the chalice that contains the wine of ages to hold said toast. And while the dead are clearly pissed at seeing this guy and clearly just want to throttle him, Elder Goodnick holds them back, saying that right now they're in the land of the living, so they need to abide by the living's laws. As such, Lord Barkis ends up downing the wine and tries to go out the church's back door, but before he can open it up, he starts coughing, as, well, like I said, that wine was poisoned. And so he ends up dying right there. And what I love is the fact that because the dead and the living are now occupying the same space, rather than him just popping over into the land of the dead, he's essentially a dead man walking, as his skin changes hue to showcase that he's dead. As such, since he is now dead, that means the dead can do whatever they want to him, as they all just crowd on him, and while we don't see what he does, apparently they do end up tearing him a new one before they drag him back to their realm. As such, with the jackass taken care of and Victor and Victoria getting ready to be wed, Emily Emily takes off the ring and gives it back to Victor, thanking him for keeping his promise. As such, as Victor and Victoria hold each other close, Emily goes to the church exit, throwing her bouquet, and, well, with her business finally resolved, she ends up transforming into butterflies and just basically disappears into the night, probably properly crossing over into another realm, as apparently the land of the dead we saw before was more like a midpoint between the living and the dead. I don't know. It's just kind of weird. Point is, Emily's resolved her unfinished business and can now rest peacefully, and that's where the film ends. So, yeah, that was Corpse Bride. My opinions on it are still mixed, unfortunately. I'm not going to say it's a bad movie at all. I do not think this film is like something that should be forgotten, but it's also a strange beast to say the least. And before I get to talking about what I think worked about the movie, I want to talk about the things that I think didn't work. And one of those things, unfortunately, is the characters. Much like with The Nightmare Before Christmas, the characters that were given for this movie aren't really written that complexly. It's kind of like, I mentioned how before, everybody seemed to like fall in love after like meeting each other and getting to know one another for maybe a few minutes, but it's just hold on one second. Sorry about that, I had to collect myself. But yeah, like I said, while like with The Nightmare Before Christmas, the characters are written rather simply, which going back to what I was talking about before, with characters kind of meeting and falling in love in minutes, the difference between what makes them work in Nightmare Before Christmas versus Corpse Bride is that in The Nightmare Before Christmas, the characters did have more to them beyond their kind of simple story arcs. There was something in there that made you still invested in the story. Jack Skellington, despite his arc essentially being that he needed to get out of a rut and find his zest for life again, was still allowed you to still kind of pulled you into his character because of just how excitable he could be, just how positive he was, and how he put that enthusiasm into everything, which made you kind of get involved with him. In the case of Sally, while she was more down to earth in comparison to Jack's loudness, she made for a much more compelling romantic lead because you at least saw the effort she was putting in to try and be there for Jack, even though it was essentially an unrequited love. She was the only member of Halloween Town. She was the only one in Halloween Town that had essentially had a solid head on her shoulders, no pun intended, and just tried to steer Jack into making the right decision, even though most of her protests wound up falling on deaf ears. But as for Corpse Bride, I'm sad to say that we don't really get that with the main characters. I'm not going to say that they're, like, bad main characters. I'll say right now that they are all likable in there's really nothing to them, because the thing is, they're kind of bland. I'm not going to say that they aren't, like, well-defined, but Victor, Victoria, and sadly even Emily don't really have a lot to their characters beyond what we see to them. Oh yes, we learn things about them, and I will at least state that there are things that they are identifiable. It's not like that they're just cookie cutter, insert name of character here just to fill a certain character archetype. No, we do learn a bit more about them. We learn that Victor is a bit more artistically inclined and likes to express himself. We learn that Victoria feels a bit restrained by her status in her family and in society in general. In the case of Emily, we do kind of sympathize with her plight, since she's essentially a walking ghost who was killed by someone that she loved and just kind of yearns for the wedding that she never had. And on top of that, like with Victor, she's also artistically inclined, and when they do actually click with one another, they do seem to work. And she does seem to be a nice character, as when she brings Victor to the land of the dead, her wedding gift to him is his dead dog, just so that he and his pet can be reunited. That's nice, that's sweet, and again, the characters themselves are not bad. I do feel sorry for them, and I do want good things to happen to them, but the problem is that unfortunately, there's not a lot to these characters. They are really just what you see is what you get. Their arcs don't really go that far with one another. They don't really go that far. There's no real big twists and turns with their characters that make you get invested in their story. It's just more like these characters are just kind of going along with things, and nothing about them really sticks out and makes you want to see more about them. Victor, Victor, while you do feel sorry for him, just kind of comes across as just like a nervous little pretty boy who doesn't really know what he's doing. Victoria, I'm just going to say right now, she's a plot device in this entire movie. She does not do anything throughout the movie beyond her marriage to Victor. And the one time that she tries to do something in the movie, namely warn people that Victor's been kidnapped by a fucking zombie, everyone thinks she's crazy and they lock her up. And as a result, she's not allowed to do anything in the movie. She is just quite literally a plot device in order to get everything along, or a damsel in distress. She does nothing in the movie, and that's disappointing. Like, wouldn't it have been nice to see her try to fight harder for Victor's affections, actually try to do something, and for that, and maybe it comes down to failure, and like with Victor, she does give up, which you could argue that that's what happens to her, as when she gets forced to marry Lord Barkis, it's clear that she's not enjoying herself and feels like she's trapped. But by that same token, that doesn't really come across from any struggles. It's just, she's just trapped in this situation, which again makes sense considering what her character issues are. But again, it does make her from a bland female lead that doesn't really make you that really just doesn't pull you into what she's going through. And then we have Emily. Again, like I said, Emily is not a bad character. I do like her and you do feel sorry for her. But like with Victor and Victoria, there's really not a lot to her character beyond her unfinished business. She seems sweet, she seems kind, she seems patient, but by virtue of her unfinished business being she wants to get married to this guy, that's what she's mostly laser focused on throughout the movie. And she's more concerned with trying to be a good wife to him than anything. And that actually, I'll take something back. Out of all the main characters, she's the one that does have the most to her. Mainly because she has been dead for so long and has been missing out on so many things in life that she did love. Like when she and Victor first come back to the land of the living so that Victor can see his parents, quote unquote, she relishes in the fact that she can enjoy these things that she's been missing out on for so long, which I do like that. But likewise, out of all the three of the main characters, she's the one that I think undergoes an actual arc, it was her realizing that she was essentially stealing Victoria's own dreams that made her realize that she was kind of in the wrong throughout the movie, which I do like, because like I said, Victoria did kind of have the most revealed about her. We learned how she ended up as a corpse bride. Emily, sorry, I'm getting Emily and Victoria's names mixed up. I apologize if I keep mixing them up. But like I said, in the case of Emily, she's the one that we learn the most about as the movie goes along. We learn how she was killed, and it was by the hand of someone that she truly cared about. We learn that she held that her feelings of loss from the wedding that she would never have are what kept her in place for so long until Victor came around. And now that she has what she wants, she doesn't want to let it go, and you do feel sorry for her. And part of her arc is her essentially learning to let go and move on, and that she can't do to someone else what was done to her. It actually is nice, and as a result, it does make by the end of the movie, when she does willingly concede and say, no, I can't do this wedding. This is your and Victoria's wedding. It makes for a much nicer finale, and it does allow her character to kind of come full circle. So I'll say this: while she's mostly laser focused on her relationship with Victor throughout the movie, she does at least have more to her. But as for the other leads, well, I will say that I liked them. Sadly, they aren't as well developed, and they don't feel as grand in the plot, despite the fact that Victor's proposal to Emily was kind of the inciting incident that kickstarted this whole thing. Which sadly also brings us to Lord Barkis. Let me put it this way. Oogie boogie, he is not. Lord Barkis is dumb. He is a dumb villain. There is nothing about him that makes him interesting. He is just there. He doesn't put, aside from offering to marry Victoria just because he wants her well, he is not a main antagonistic force. The most he does to impede Victoria and Victor's relationship is when he pulls in the town crier to announce to the Van Dorts and the Everglobs that Victor's been taken away by an unknown woman. That's it. And by the time he says, well, maybe I can marry Victoria, it was when the Everglots got to a point where they could say, well, maybe we need to marry our daughter off to someone else so we don't end up in the poorhouse. It's like, he's just there. He's just kind of an opportunistic jackass who just came at the right time and decided to try and trick everyone into getting what he wants. And, like, you can still say that can work for a good villain. Well, what makes him not a good villain is that he's just bland. Nothing about him is interesting. He's handsome. He's full of himself. He's a high society lord who thinks he can look down on others, on all that crap. He gets angry when things don't go his way. He's just a bland villain. He's not charming. He's not that memorable. He's just a bland villain, and he doesn't really do a lot as part of the major conflict. I would dare say he's not involved in the major conflict. While he does become the substitute husband for Victoria's wedding, again, that feels more like just a time and place sort of thing. You probably could have just cut him out of the movie, and not a lot would change except for maybe the climax where Victor and he end up getting into a tussle over Victoria. It really does not feel like he does a lot in the movie, and as a result, I just kind of find him to be a bland villain. If anything, I would argue that maybe Emily is kind of like the antagonist. And I'm not saying that she's a villain, but it is her that is keeping Victor and Victoria apart. Although I guess you could say that the douchebag did actually contribute to the plot in one regard, as it was his wedding to Victoria that finally made Victor say, well, maybe I should marry the corpse. So, there you go. That's his contributing factor to the movie. Otherwise, I feel like Emily acts as a better antagonist, and I wouldn't even call her a villain. It's just that what she wants is in direct opposition to what Victoria wants. So, there you go. But, on top of that, to kind of add to why a lot of the main characters, and sadly even the villain, aren't really that well defined, the story feels rushed. Part of the reason why I don't think any of the main characters feel that developed for what they are is because it feels like the story is just kind of breezing through everything and not really giving a lot of time for things to settle. And yeah, I don't like that. Not one bit. It makes everything feel half-hearted. Like there's nothing really to it. While we see, like, let me give an example. Victor and Victoria, despite the fact that the two of them say that they love each other and they want to spend the rest of their lives together, they literally only shared one scene together before they decided, you know what, you're the one for me. That's all it was. And even then, all they really did was just kind of play piano together before Victoria opened up about how she always wanted to get married to someone that she loved. That's not really a connection. It's a moment, and a good moment, I'll say that. But I don't really think that's enough time for Victor to look at her and say, yes, this is the woman I want. It's just weird. Same goes for Emily, of all things. Believe it, for Emily, it makes sense why she would probably latch on to Victor like she did. Like I said, her unfinished business was that she wanted to get married, and Victor proposed to her, whether he knew it or not. And so she wants to just hold on to this guy as hard as she can because she doesn't want to let another guy go. But in the case of Victor, what compels him to want to stay with Emily? Yes, he knows that she's nice, she got him his dog, and likewise they play the piano together. But literally almost every other moment in the movie, he's trying to get away from her. Yes, he feels bad for hurting her feelings, and he doesn't like seeing her upset, but liking someone and feeling sorry does not equal love. I don't really understand how he and Emily can work as a couple. Again, the only way that I can accept that he and Emily would actually decide to stay as Emily's husband was when he learned that Victoria had gotten married, and he knew that if he left at this point, that Emily would be even more heartbroken. heartbroken and he wouldn't want to hurt her. So that's the only reason that I can think of for why he would still want to go through and marrying Emily despite the fact that he ran away. Otherwise, their relationship is as ill-developed as Victor and Victoria's, albeit that the two of them still had some moments together, but they still weren't enough to at least make me think that these two genuinely love each other. And if I can get on another nitpicky note, why the hell did they need that spell in the middle of the movie to go back to the land of the living? I mean, really. At the beginning of the movie and at the end of the movie, the dead can somehow freely walk the earth without the need of a spell. Victoria was able to climb out of her grave and actively pursue Victor so that he could kiss the bride, and then she dragged him back to the land of the dead with her. And then likewise, at the end of the movie, the dead rose from their graves just so they could attend a wedding. That's like, why did they need that spell in the middle? What was the reason for that? If the dead can freely leave their graves whenever they want, why is it that they needed a spell in the middle of the movie to be able to freely leave the land of the dead? It doesn't really make sense to me, because it seems implied that the dead can leave. Is it like only for special occasions that they can do it? Or maybe is it because this is a union between the living and the dead, so it allows them special circumstances? Maybe, but if that's the case, then the movie doesn't really do a good job explaining it. And as a result, it just feels weird and inconsistent and just kind of makes me scratch my head, and it just kind of feels weird. And adding on to the rushed nature of the story, I don't like the ending. Look, the climax I admit between when Victor and hold on one second. Sorry, I forgot the bad guy's name again. But basically, in the climax between Lord Barkis and Victor, I admit it was humorous. This Lord Barkis and him were essentially having a sword fight with Victor using a fork to just keep stabbing and poking at him, which I found kind of amusing. But when Emily just kind of turning into butterflies after she concedes after she concedes Victor to Victoria, again, it doesn't really feel like a proper finale. Yeah, her character arcs come to its natural conclusion and she can finally pass on. But what about everybody else? I feel like that at that point, there should be something akin to an epilogue. What about our other main characters? What about Victor and Victoria? I kind of want to see them get married. I kind of want to see the Van Dorts and the Everglotts actually join together as a family. Do they live happily ever after? Do they remember Emily? Maybe we could have a scene where we see Victor and Victoria happily living in a house. They're both just enjoying each other's company and happily being married. Well, maybe outside their window you see a butterfly that looks like Emily was just kind of watching them and showcasing that, yeah, while she may have finally passed on, she's still kind of with them in spirit, and it's just happy that they're both happy too. It's, again, I feel like that there could have been something there, but instead they just ended it right at Emily's passing, so to speak, and it just kind of, and it doesn't make the film feel like it has a proper ending. It just feels incomplete. And I understand the whole mindset of, well, it was kind of Emily's story and she got what she wanted. She was a bride at a wedding, so now she can pass on. Well, great. What about our other main characters? Shouldn't we get something regarding them? I don't understand it. It just kind of feels incomplete, and it helps, and combined with the other factors in the story, it does make this whole thing feel like it was just a thing that happened. It doesn't feel as emotionally satisfying as you think it'll be. So, yeah, that kind of makes it all a problem. With that said, what about this movie do I like? Well, as I mentioned, I do like the main characters. While I think that they really should have had more time to stew and be developed as main characters, they're fine. They're likable enough. I like Victor is kind of charming in his own way, and he does seem likable in a kind of humble way. Victoria seems fun. Victoria's a nice enough character, and you do kind of feel for her and the plight she's put in, even if at the end of the day she feels more like a plot device. And like I said, out of all the main characters, Emily is the one that got the most development, and she feels as though, and I do kind of like where her character ends up by the end, as she realizes that her desire to be married to this guy is actually actually just is instead stealing the dream of another person, and she can't essentially live with that fact, and concedes Victor to someone else that she believes deserves him. I like that. It's genuinely sweet, and I think it works. On that regard, it does make for the film to be more enjoyable. And likewise, this film is a musical. It has about 5 songs scattered throughout, but I can't think of any of them that are bad. According to Plan, I think it's a good opening song, which is a good way of expositing about what's going on and what's leading into the story. Which also with some nice with the different. Which I love how essentially how the song gets started is that we hear the monotony of the town just turning into the musical notes that become the song. And likewise, I love the differing tones between the Van Dorts and the Everglots, as the Van Dorts are more than happy for this wedding to go through, while the Everglots are dreading the day it arrives because they realize, oh, we've been reduced to having to associate with them. I kind of find that amusing. The Remains of the Day song, very energetic song. It's very fun, just full of so much energy, and surprise that you really get pulled into it as well, and just can't help but feel jazzed up along with all the other characters. And so I like that. The Tears to Shed song that Emily sings when she realizes that Victor doesn't want to be with her is genuinely heartbreaking and does help showcase what Emily is going through after all the crap she's been through both in life and in death, and it does make you feel sorry for her. The Wedding Day and the Wedding Day song, great. It's just a great time all around. Just kind of seeing the land of the dead just kind of go into an uproar and just getting so excited as they prepare for the song. It's just catchy as all hell, and I dig it. So in that regard, yeah, the music is a lot of fun too, and definitely does help to get you through what's going on, and does get you invested in everything. And of course, like with The Nightmare Before Christmas, this world looks amazing. There was so much creativity packed into this movie, and it shows when you differentiate the lands of the living and the dead. In a strange twist, the land of the dead seems a lot more lively than the land of the living. The land of the living is just kind of drab and bland and just kind of full of grays and blacks and other muted colors. And it just kind of feels like despite this being the land of the living, all the life has been kind of sucked out of it. Like everyone living is just kind of going through the motions and just kind of living in some sort of monotony. And as a result, it makes them as a result, the land of the living just kind of feels drab and like there's nothing really happening in it. Likewise, the land of the dead is the opposite. Yeah, the land of the dead does have a creepy atmosphere to it. There's green mists everywhere. There's dark towers wherever you go, and literally everybody is a walking corpse. But at the same time, everybody has their own unique color schemes to them, their own unique design, their own unique outlooks depending on how they were killed, their own unique look. Their own unique looks depending on how they died. It's just really damn creative. They have more color to them. You can buy that they're dead, as when someone dies, they end up getting blue skin, which does kind of look like their skin is flushed despite everything. But it does make for a lot more creativity. And again, I like the juxtaposition of both worlds. Like I said, in the land of the living, things just kind of feel slow and drab, like everyone's just trying to get through the day. Whereas in the land of the dead, it feels like let me put it this way. It's like in the land of the living, you kind of just you were essentially working for the weekend so you could finally just relax. In the land of the dead, you reach the weekend, and now you can finally just kick your feet up and unwind. It's kind of fun, and we see that reflected in the energy in all the people from the land of the dead. They have a certain lust for, lack of a better term, life in them. When they sing about the story of Emily and how she was betrayed by Lord Barkis, they are just having a ball, just dancing about it, singing about how eventually we all come down to the land, we all go down there at the end of the day, and once you're down there, it's just them having fun and just trying to be as lively and enjoy what they have right here. It's kind of like they think, well, we didn't treasure this stuff when we were alive, so now that we're dead, let's live it up like there's no tomorrow, because there kind of isn't. I like that. It's really fun, and it makes for a lot more of an energetic movie. And like I said, the designs of all the characters are actually really nice. Even in the land of the living, each of the characters do have all their very designs, and all of them just look strange and unique, with the most normal looking people couple being Victor and Victoria, which ironically makes it sound, which ironically in that world they're the ugly ones or the plain ones. It's kind of amusing in its own way, but it does make for some nice, unique and varied setups and for a unique and creative world. I do like that. It's actually really nice. And as such, all these things combined, while I won't say that I think the film is a great movie, I hesitate to call it a bad one either. Like I said, I find it to be a bit of a mixed bag. The story and the writing and the main characters don't feel like they should have had more time to them, should have had more developed about them, and as a result, it kind of doesn't pull you into the story and the conflicts of our main characters beyond maybe Emily. And even then, she's only one piece of the puzzle. And sadly, despite even if you have one piece that fits, that doesn't mean you can just force the others in. And as a result, it does kind of pull you out of the movie a little. But what keeps you in the movie and makes you want to keep seeing everything happen is again the characters are at least likable despite their lack of development. I like Emily's arc. The music is fun, and the designs for everything is still unique and varied. And it does still allow for a creative type of film, even if the story and main characters really needed a lot more time and a few more explanations in order to make work. So as a result, like I said, while I wouldn't say that this film is bad, I wouldn't say it's a great film either. I say that if you're curious about this movie, I do think that you will find it to be a memorable experience, but whether or not I can say you'll like this movie or not, well, I think it's really up to interpretation. I know that there are people that love this movie, and I know there are people that don't. Either way, whatever side of the aisle you'll fall under, I do think that you will at least have some fun in this experience. It's going to be a bumpy road, I won't deny it, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy this movie when I saw it. So, yeah, that's really all I have to say. So, yeah. I hope you enjoyed the video, regardless. And, well, as always, I'm Samuel Johnson, and I hope that you tune in next week as we see the director of Nightmare Before Christmas. No, not Tim Burton. Henry Selick, he was the director. Come back to direct another stop-motion spooky film as we take a look at a true scary movie classic, Coraline.